So 2021 was a pretty good year for the Essendon Football Club. Going into it, a lot of people didn't expect us to do well after having top-end talent walk out on us. The likes of Joe Danaher, Orazio Fantasia, Connor McKenna and Adam Sard had all left. We were predicted to probably be in that bottom 4 spot. But we came out in 2021 and we played really good attacking footy. Players like Darcy Parish, Zach Merritt and Jake Stringer all had fantastic years. Peter Wright cemented himself as a really good key forward. The young talent that we'd recently drafted were really starting to come into their own with players like Harry Jones, Nick Cox and Archie Perkins really starting to get their name out there. And Ben Rutten was really hitting his strides as a first year coach. So a lot of us Essendon fans were looking at the state of the football club and then looking at 2022 and thinking, man, this is so exciting. What could go wrong?
Arms in the air! That has gone through! Jamie Elliott has won the game of footy for this famous club.
Alright, let's talk about it.
Yeah, it's round 9, TJ, and as I said, it's getting tiring because we're saying the same things over and over about they're the worst defensive side in the game.
So on field in 2022, Essendon was an absolute mess. There's probably no better way to put it, to be honest. One thing I really want to touch on before we get into the defensive woes, and don't worry, there's plenty to talk about there, is our offense. So I think in 2022, Essendon actually played a pretty bland game of footy for the first half of the year. We weren't really taking any risky options, not really trying to kick it into the corridor. You didn't really see our halfbacks try to break lines. A lot of our game was centered around possessing the ball in the opposition's forward half, and it just led to some really, really boring games. And then when our defense eventually fell apart, we just got blown out of the water, and we weren't posting big scores at all. I think when you compare us to a club like Collingwood, whose game plan in 2022 was really offensive. They took the risky options. They weren't afraid to make mistakes, as opposed to us in the first half where we didn't take any risky options. We were really afraid to make mistakes. We tried to keep possession of the ball a lot of the time. If you compare those two game plans and then look at the long term and what's going to stack up in finals, I think as a club we really have to change this mindset and just really encourage our players to take the game on every opportunity we get. I think if we were frequently posting big scores and we were offensively competent, our year wouldn't have been as bad as it was. But yeah, that first half was pretty meek offensively, and even in the second half, it's not like we were that good there as well. But don't worry, because the boys at the hangar understood that a shit offense was nicely complemented with a shit defense. So our defense has been covered extensively by the media. I'm sure if you even just go on YouTube and look up Essendon 2022, there'll be a shit ton of videos from Fox Footy and Sunday Footy Show about all the reasons why we were crap. But there's a stat I haven't really seen touched on, and that's our pressure. Essendon's pressure was dog shit in 2022. We were 18th out of 18 in a comp that had the West Coast Eagles and North Melbourne, who are two of the historically worst sides that have ever been in the comp. So I think it's no wonder that we got pulled apart as often as we did when we're last in the comp for average pressure acts per game. It's a bit embarrassing, to be honest. And combine that with the fact that we were second last for average tackles per game, and we were fourth for average one-on-ones inside our defensive 50 per game, I think those stats combined really tell a tale of how bad our defensive structure was. Because we somehow weren't putting pressure on them, we weren't tackling them, but our defenders were still getting isolated at one-on-ones in the defensive 50. So, what can you say, man? It's shit. I mean, the Titanic hit an iceberg, split in half, and was still less leaky than Essendon was defensively last year. What can you do?
Speaking of climate change, when is
Herbatron
gonna start thinking about some underwear change? Am I right, ladies? Who killed
Herbatron?
I can't, that's sort of like, if 1 + 1 + 1 = 5, what do you reckon? I can't answer that.
Right, so for all the garbage that happened on field throughout the year, we then had a whole shit ton of garbage happen off the field towards the end of the year as well, starting with the sacking of our coach Ben Rutten. Now, I'm not going to say getting rid of Ben Rutten was the right or wrong thing to do, but when you have a look at a lot of the premiership sides over the last 10 years, a lot of the coaches have had an extended tenure at the club. You rarely hear of a club bringing in a coach and then winning a flag immediately. There's probably Chris Scott in 2011 and Luke Beveridge at the Bulldogs in 2016 that come to the top of my head. But all the other coaches that have won flags over the last, 10, 15 years have had extended tenures at the club. So the senior management at Essendon really need to see that and acknowledge, hey, if we actually want to get to a point where we're winning flags, we need to give our coach some time to develop the game plan, to spend time with our players, and actually build the culture that they want around the club. If we keep turning over coaches every few years, like we have done since, 2014, 2015, God knows how long it's going to be before we actually win a final. I also think the club went about it in a pretty shitty way where it got leaked to the media and then we just let Ben hear all of it through the media, and apparently we didn't even contact him for like 2 or 3 days, even though him and his manager were reaching out and trying to find out what was happening. That was pretty disappointing, but yeah, unfortunately it only gets worse. There's also been major changes at the board level as well, with David Barham taking over from Paul Gratcher as the president. I don't really have a solid opinion on this, to be honest. It is just a bit disappointing that Essendon's board is constantly in the media, not for good reasons, but just because there's been infighting and people getting voted out as the president, after some bad losses. One thing I will say is that David Barham, for the most part, has done the right thing since becoming the president. He did have one awful press conference and he did make one awful hiring decision, which we'll touch on in a second. But for the most part, he's been an advocate for change and he's been pushing the club in the right direction. So I will give him props for that. The real stake of this video is going to be talking about the Andrew Thorburn debacle. How did we fuck this up? For those of you who don't know, Andrew Thorburn was the ex-NAB CEO, who Essendon appointed their own CEO for a whole of 24 hours. That's right. Not days, not weeks, not months, but 24 hours. Surely we've set a record for like the quickest CEO tenure in the AFL. It's gotta be. So we ended up letting Andrew Thorburn go. Publicly there was a lot of outcry about his religion and the church he follows and some of the opinions they have, which I don't really want to touch on, because I don't think that's why we shouldn't have hired him. While Andrew Thorburn was a NAB CEO, there was a royal commission conducted into NAB which found them charging $650 million in no service fees to customers. For those of you who don't know, a no service fee is just charging a customer and giving them no service, essentially. They don't get anything for it. And to add to the shittery, millions of dollars of that $650 came from deceased customers. That's right. While Andrew Thorburn was the CEO of NAB, NAB was charging dead people money and giving them no service. In saying that, I don't really know how you could give service to a dead person, but yeah, sure. When confronted about what had happened, Andrew Thorburn said it was just professional negligence. Which, you know what? He probably would have made a good CEO for the Essendon Football Club. So yeah, David Barham and whoever was on the board at the time royally fucked up by hiring this guy. If they had just Googled Andrew Thorburn, they would have read the articles and they probably would have been like, we don't really want to associate with this, with all the drama that we're going through. Or worse, we did Google him and we thought, fuck it, still a good idea. Since then, we've obviously parted ways with Andrew Thorburn and we've hired Craig Vosso. It was a much better appointment. He's been involved with the West Coast Eagles for a number of years in multiple roles. So hope Craig goes well with the Bombers, and yeah, we'll see what happens going forward. All right, let's look to the future and talk some 2023.
McDonald, Tim and Woody, he can go underground slightly to Hooker, gloved it back to McDonald, Tim and Woody, now under real pressure, got it to Perkins, through a bit of traffic, the right foot, that is just class.
I think Andrew McGrath has to play off half-back. I don't think he's really suited to the midfield role, and he definitely plays his best footy down back, so he's got to be a lockdown there. I know he's got some niggling injuries, but I'd love to see Nick Cox become Essendon's version of Mark Blicavs from Geelong. Blicavs is an incredible player and an elite athlete, and he adds so much when he's playing for Geelong. I would love to see Nick Cox model his game off him going forward. I think Peter Wright could win a Coleman in the future, especially if Essendon starts to implement a more attacking style of footy. Really, the sky's the limit for him. So we'll see how he goes. We'll see how he goes with the support from Wiedemann as well. I'm really looking forward to seeing that. Archie Perkins is a fucking superstar. He's going to win a Brownlow one day, potentially the next 5 in a row. Mason Redmond's probably going to tie a Brownlow or 2 with Archie Perko. And one to keep an eye on this year is Darcy Parish. He's probably going to play an incredible season. He's coming out of contract and going into, I believe he's a free agent of some description. If he leaves Essendon, I imagine Geelong would probably be one of the front runners to pick him up. But hopefully he stays with us and continues to be one of our better midfielders. Ken Baldwin's been training down back and apparently he's been doing quite well. So he looked pretty good in both the preseason games and he was also really good in a VFL practice match just the other day. Essendon definitely need a bit of defensive depth, so that's more than welcome. Ben Hobbs has been flying under the radar a bit. I'm keen to see how he fits into our team at this point. A lot of people haven't been putting him in our starting 22, but I think with injuries in the midfield and stuff as the year goes on, he's definitely going to get some more opportunities and I hope he continues to improve. And just a special shout out to Brad Scott. I think Brad's going to add a lot to our team, especially with the experience at AFL House. I imagine he's probably watched a shit ton of Essendon vision from the last few years and he'll be able to identify our weaknesses in defence and hopefully get us a bit more structurally sound down there. I also really want to see him punch a wall. Like, honest to God, that'd just make my year. A lot of Essendon coaches over the last few years have been a bit tame, got a bit of a poker face, a bit of a nice guy to him. I really want to see Brad Scott just punch a fucking wall or break a phone. Yeah, if he breaks the phone, I'll be pretty happy. Just to have our coach show a bit of passion would be nice. Overall, I think there's plenty to look forward to if you're a Bombers fan over the next few years. We still have a good young list. We have heaps of salary cap space. We've got a new head coach, we've got a new board, and hopefully they're going to bring more stability. And I really am excited about the development program that Brad Scott's talking about putting in place. There's some interesting commentary from Jordan Lewis the other week that Essendon hadn't been focusing on development over the last few years. So I'm keen to see the current coaches put in place a development program and start to bring these young guys up and turn them into the superstars that we all know that they can be. Anyways, I'm going to wrap this up. 2022 is disappointing. It is what it is. I look forward to seeing what we can achieve in 2023, and hopefully it's nowhere near as bad as last year, because I don't think many of us can take it. Alright guys, see ya.